Hello everyone, welcome to TRG 30. We're here on Wednesday, September 23rd. Yep, autumn has well and truly arrived here in the UK. Jill will be with you at the top of the hour. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for TRG 30 today. TRG 30, where we talk about and lean into the bold ideas and action that will help our sector be more resilient. And you may remember and may have been with me this summer when I advanced 7 new ways that I see our sector needing to think and behave as our organizations adapt through and beyond this pandemic time. I've been in listening and conversation sessions with many of you in recent weeks discussing these ways, and I'm deeply appreciative of your sharing, your candor, your time. And this week, we're talking about today, and I'm in a listening session tomorrow about governance models and how they must change, adapt to invest in your work. So today, governance models, and our discussion is part 1 of 2. Today, I hope to challenge some thinking in you, as well as hopefully inspire you to imagine a new kind of reality. In governance part 2, I'll bring a practitioner who is changing this reality for his organization. That will be in coming months. Stay tuned. But before we get started, I am curious. I'm curious about how you would respond to this poll. What does your organization need today from your governing body or your board? Pick as many as you'd like. Choose and react. Does your organization need direct philanthropy? Does it need connections to funders or funding opportunities? Do you need them to lead strategic planning or oversee strategic planning? Do you need day-to-day management oversight and help? Specific sector knowledge from arts and culture, or business knowledge from other kinds of subject matters like law or HR or accounting? Do you need better connection to artists for inspiration and thought partnership? Connections to the communities we serve, or connections to a broader community, those who today you may not serve? What are your needs today in this pandemic and moving through pandemic time? As I'm looking at your responses and seeing what you are ranking right now, we need philanthropy. No surprise, it looks like connections to funding and funders and connections to the community we serve and maybe don't serve. These are the votes that this poll is getting right now. Thank you, Stephen. So these are our top answers. Financing through direct philanthropy or access to, connections to community, connection to business models, or business skill, rather, and experience we may not have today. Okay, so let's keep these answers in mind as we head into our discussion today. And here's what I want you to be listening for. First, a reality check. You just indicated what your organization needs today. Is your board, is your governing body delivering in a way that serves those needs? Second, I want you to be listening during our discussions for insights and challenges, and especially if you are the chief exec in an organization, insights and challenges not only about your board, but the role you play in creating, maintaining the board that you have. And finally, I want you to be listening. I want you to check if you're on autopilot. If you're on autopilot about the way your governing body is structured, if your governing body itself is on autopilot related to the assumptions it has about the way that it's structured, the role that it plays, and the work that it does. Now, before we head into this conversation, I want to acknowledge I'm not in your position. Today, I don't run an arts and cultural institution, and I don't face the pressure of interacting with and managing this type of group in a crisis environment of a global pandemic. But I have managed them in my past. I serve on boards today, and I work regularly with board and administrative teams who are working hard to manage their future past this pandemic time. And lest you think that something as abstract and big picture is how your governance runs isn't a now issue, I beg to differ. And during this session, I hope to convince you. Almost all of us in this collective room have boards or governing bodies, and most of them are focused here. It's rational, smart sounding, right? Boards should help plan and analyze, evaluate and control risk, review and assess practice. In fact, these areas of board works are actually required by our government when they deem us a charitable or a nonprofit organization. Governance as control, as accountability officers, as risk managers. And yet, what's missing from this stack of blocks? What if the purpose was this? What if governance was equally focused on risk, but the risk of not being everything we could be? What if your board was not only obsessed about control, but about delivering? I love this action word, this verb, delivering on the organization's mission and strategy. There are realities about purpose, the purpose of your board, your governing body. Have you thought about purpose? If we think on a macro level, there are some purposes that I could identify and want to bring to your attention. In the US, we saw it in the poll. Whether or not your board has a give or get philanthropic commitment, you're familiar with the phrase if you operate an organization in the US. And whether or not they have this, your board is focused on delivering the financing that your organization needs. And there are results and consequences to this. If a board is a fundraising mechanism, boards can get large, and there can be many committees that are standing or mushroom to keep these people active. So more than in other countries we operate in, US boards tend to be larger. Some of you in this room have boards that are 50 people and larger. And they certainly are larger than corporate boards, which I'm going to come back to here in a minute. On the other end of the spectrum is the UK general reality. Generally, the focus is laser tight on business planning and accountability to this planning. And the consequence here is the boards are smaller and their objectives are strategic, but the philanthropic deliverables are small or non-existent. It's a reality about that board, those boards' purpose. And in Canada, it varies. The boards tend to be smaller, yes, but there is a variation. Some boards are big, infrastructured fundraising machines, and some are very focused, small, and nimble. Purpose and realities. There's impact to how we think about this structure too, how we implement this structure. Purpose has a big impact. It matters. So if we have a big board, this is a little bit of hyperbole, but those of you who spend most of your time managing your boards know that managing that work to keep that legion of people active can be a full-time job. The purpose might result in a rubber stamp. If that board is not active or strategically focused, but gathers 4 times a year, or maybe just for an AGM or annual meeting, is that board rubber stamping what you and your administrative teams are doing? Or might the purpose result in a focus, but it misses opportunities and there's less impact, be it fundraising or strategy or elsewhere? Does it limit the impact that that board could have? The other reality about the way we organize nonprofit arts and cultural boards is based on volunteerism. Volunteerism is the model. And what I've begun to ask, what's the impact of that? Now, most of you are thinking, well, Jill, we can't pay boards. Well, in fact, we can. Our nations enable there to be paying, but the provisions for and the consequences of doing and taking this action, not only what it might mean to the brand and reputation, but also what it means to volunteer liability. Volunteers are generally protected from malfeasance at the organizational level. So there's a smart reason and an incentive that many governments want to create for volunteerism. And yet, does it limit? Does it limit our access to talent? If you were on TRG 30 with me when we hosted Shakespeare's Globe, you heard Nell Leishan, who's the deputy board chair at Shakespeare's Globe in London, talk about the tension between being a freelance artist and managing on her income the amount of volunteer work required to serve in a leadership role on that board. And I know the conversations you're having about inclusion and equity and diversity. Does the volunteer model limit the people at your table? I've been curious about this and have researched and have been talking to people like the folks at the National Association of Corporate Directors, a nonprofit organization that counsels corporate organizations about their board strategies. They recruit and pay. I'm not recommending, but I'm interested. They recruit and pay, and when they do, they recruit for skills like this. Think about your own board. You're recruited, and you're recruited if you have strong communication skills, financial expertise, strategic planning experience, a proven track record of excellence, professionalism under pressure. So I'm thinking about posture here. Posture. Are we begging and pleading? Is our posture, please engage with us? Please help us? Or is our posture to inspire and challenge people whom we recruit and interview and hold accountable to delivering on getting us through this pandemic time and to a future strategy now? Before we go to questions and what I hope is a robust discussion. I want to introduce you to someone, this guy, Dan Pallotta. If you haven't watched this 2013 TED Talk, please do. I was introduced to this shortly after it was broadcast, and the concepts really never left my thinking, but now in the context of this pandemic and the crisis of creativity that I spoke about last week with author Rahav Harfouche, his work is really rising to the top of my mind again. I want to tell you just a little bit about Dan. He's an American, an entrepreneur, humanitarian, and author. He's best known for he's best known for a lot of things, but he started being known for the multi-day charitable events that he created. You may be familiar with the breast cancer 3-day walks, or the AIDS rides, or the suicide prevention night walks that they called Out of the Darkness. There's a long story about these events and what happened to them and the money that was raised and the organizations around them. You'll hear about this in his TED Talk. He's also an author, and listen to the titles of these books. Uncharitable: How Restraints on Nonprofits Undermine Their Potential. And Charity Case: How the Nonprofit Community Can Stand Up for Itself and Really Change the World. There's more, but that's a start. And most importantly, he's become the somewhat controversial figure who has suggested that nonprofits and charitable organizations are put in prisons by governing bodies, boards, and others, and these prisons limit their impact. And Dan believes, as I do, as I bet you do, that nonprofits play an exceptional, unique, distinguished role in communities that business cannot play, and that those nonprofits must have impact. So he describes the nonprofit prison as having 5 elements. The first one is this: uninspired compensation models. Uninspired and non-competitive compensation models on our staff, boards, limit the talent that make this exquisite mission of yours and your peers happen. He tells not the story, but relays the truth that today in the US, if you get a graduate degree at a respected university, your compensation will run somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 a year. As a nonprofit executive, he offers up the health services or human services executive somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000. So if you're the graduate of that master's program and you want to help the world, will you take 1/3 of your potential value and pay to do that? Or would you get about the business of being successful in business? Get yourself put on that board, make an annual philanthropic contribution, take the tax credit, and end up, as he jokes, supervising and bossing around the poor SOB administrator who took that compensation package in that nonprofit. It's hyperbole, but what we know is that compensation has an impact in a competitive environment. It's the first part, according to Dan, of the nonprofit prison. The second is the pathetic investment he argues that we make in fundraising and marketing. Now you're looking at your budget, some of you, and saying, man, I'm spending money. Well, compare the amount of money you're spending to send your message, to have your impact. Compare that to the amount of money consumer products and services in the corporate sector invest. Comparatively, we can't possibly have the mind share. And yet the work that we're doing is equally, if not more important to our communities. The second part of the prison, pathetic investment in marketing and fundraising. The third is a limited tolerance, sometimes none, for failure. Programs have to succeed in year 1. Investments have to return now, or we can't afford to repeat that failure. We don't have the infrastructure to tolerate it in our bellies or in our balance sheet, and we don't have patience for things to play out. He reminds in his book that Amazon took more than a dozen years to post a profit. And in our arts and cultural institutions, if we try a new project, if we launch a new series, if we schedule an exhibit, it has to play out. Otherwise, it's yanked. And part of the reason is because of our financial infrastructure. And the fifth element then is the lack of access to growth capital. And whether you're starting up as a fresh organization or starting up something new in your organization, we need startup capital. And access to growth capital is a key part of what limits us, according to Dan, and the fifth element of this nonprofit prison. We all want to be focused on and measured by impact, by the ripple effect of our ambitions and ideas and dreams. We cannot be measured by one-time failures or the percent that we spend on overhead or marketing as a proportion of our overall budgets. Impact. So, is your governing body focused here, only here? My final question of you is your organization focused on and effective at helping your organization achieve the impact that you need, want, and dream of having? As I watch you answer this question, know that my provocation and reason for this conversation is for us to challenge and think about what we need to do now to enable us to emerge out of this pandemic time better and brighter than we have ever been. And as I look at your answers as they're coming in, we're in the center. Most of the time, you say, on rare occasions, you say. I'm going to ask Stephen for this to be, thank you, the directional answer. And regardless of my definition, impact is one that I want you to be thinking about. And asking, are you, or is your board leaders, or are your board leaders on autopilot? Are you just in coast mode about what a board is? We must have one. It's always been structured this way. Well, if so, here's some things you can do now. First, check in with yourself. Allow yourself and with your board leaders some reflection time about what the current state of play is. Review this word purpose, not structure. Purpose. Is it control? Is it delivery of strategy? And what's the expectation of the board as a result? Also, evaluate culture. A culture of control is very different than a culture of belief. And there are implications on the entire institution and what it can accomplish as a result. And ideally, the organizational needs that you identified at the front of this session, that's where your board purpose needs to be aligned. So I look forward to having a conversation with you and hope that you've got questions that we can field now in a discussion.
Hey, Jill. Questions you can submit in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and please do take the time to do that now. Jill, as the questions come in, the first question I'd like to ask, which is, how long should this change take that you're provocating us on today? Can we do this by January, or is this a 3-year project?
Yeah, this is why I said what I said at the beginning. It may not feel urgent. Jill, is this the thing I need to do now? Yes, because change takes time, especially here. There's an organization that I hope to be able to advance to you all as a case study where we are actively digging into this question about purpose. And we are talking about building up the appetite and interest for change over the next year and looking toward an event that would enable the board to imagine change a year from now. This is the kind of work that will take time and will take leadership, and that's the reason why I think we've got to start now.
Jill, Forrest has asked a question around how you measure your impact, and Bradley's followed up by saying he would assert that several organizations he's been involved with do not have a fully fledged understanding of what our impact needed to be. With different answers across the organization, it's hard for anyone to answer that effectively. There's some alignment challenge there, but also around measurement of impact. What would you say to that?
Well, doesn't this go back to the question that we one of the 7 new ways, which is about, is our mission good enough? And inherent in this question is a question about impact. Measuring impact is custom and bespoke to an organization, but our ability to define it simply is so critical now. So when I look at missions, I see we're going to do these 17 things for our community and be the best at it. And I think, really? So is the impact to make great artists? Okay. Is the impact to ensure that music is used to educate my community? Okay. But defining simply and clearly this issue of impact is critical. Both of these questions and their authors are spot on. And I wish I had a formula, but this is one of the most important board and executive leader conversations to engage in now, to come off autopilot.
Paige admits a healthy dose of skepticism about paying a board.
Yeah.
And says our product per se is heavily labor intensive, and I would venture that most of us have explored as many efficiencies as possible. How to justify paying a board, and then what is their role? Do we assume compensation will result in a change in their service?
Yeah, right. I don't have, Paige, I do not have answers. I'm provoking the question and I do not have answers, but here are some of the things I've thought about. Nonprofits, some do, they tend to be bigger institutions. The average corporate compensation on corporate boards is a $25,000 annual retainer. That will make everybody in this room gulp. I'm not recommending that. 0 to 25,000. So I don't know what the number is, and I know that there are negative and positive implications on this ledger. But I am curious about the expectation we have for board members. Defining the purpose. And if the purpose is to help my organization achieve impact of educating artists in the best, most robust way, then if that's the purpose, then I, as a chief executive, need people around me who can challenge, help me develop, and deliver on that strategy. And for some, that's going to be strategic thinking. For some of it, it's going to be strategic action. But I'm not sure it's only control and assessment. And so switching the narrative around accountability and who's hiring whom, that's what I'm thinking about and interested in.
This is an anonymous question. It seems TRG is challenging us to think about the board delivering value impact just as our programming does.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's right. That's interesting. That's right. Because we cannot afford to not have impact. We cannot afford anything that doesn't have impact. And so as we wind down, and Stephen, I'm looking at the clock, always my commitment, I'll answer the questions that aren't anonymous. We are going to pick this up with an organization that is creating change. I am interested in this question about what the structure is and what it might look like, and want to put some more legs on that with you. But impact in a post-pandemic environment and imagining it on our administrative teams, on our boards, and on our stages and in our exhibit halls. That is what inspires me, and I believe that will inspire people in our communities to step up in critical ways, paid or unpaid. I think we can motivate people to step up if we're clear and inspiring about what we expect from them. I want to just, before you all go, because I know you all have the next set of Zoom calls, I want to remind you about what's coming up on the next TRG 30. We have Birmingham Royal Ballet, who's going to be talking about their efforts near the end of this year. Dr. Michael Maddouse, who will be building on last week's conversation about the crisis in the creative sector as we talk about personal and organizational resiliency. We're going to make a case for the subscription with an author who works outside of and in the corporate world, where the subscription model is on it's on the go-go, and our Canadian friends at the Banff Center, important, critical pandemic and post-pandemic visions that they have for change in their institution. Listen, we are here for you. We want to work with you to help create change, and I just always want to remind you that all kinds of resources, free and otherwise, are available to you, especially the free sector benchmark, which is increasingly serving as a ballast for data and progress and process through this pandemic that will be here on the other side to help deliver tools and ways for you to be looking at your patrons and households. And finally, there are other resources on a consulting basis that we have available that I would love to talk with you about. Thank you for joining me today for TRG 30. Stephen, thank you so much always for being here with me to vet and talk about these important issues for our sector. We will see you next week. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Take care. Bye, everyone.